I want to create a world in which my son is proud of what we do, in a world and a job that actually does impact people's lives for the better.
William and Catherine in tears reveal what Camilla did to Prince Louis. In secret, nation stunned. Okay, stay with this for a moment, because the title points to something far more serious than a royal family disagreement. According to the claims at the center of this story, Prince Louis was allegedly shut out of a private royal ceremony after Camilla was said to have ordered that he be kept away because his playful behavior could embarrass the crown. William and Catherine were allegedly not properly informed, and that is what transformed a quiet palace decision into a deeply personal shock. Now, watch this carefully. The alleged exclusion was not presented as a simple change of plans. The claim is that a decision affecting Louis was made behind his parents' backs, while palace staff were allegedly told to keep the instruction concealed. For William and Catherine, the disturbing part was not simply that their youngest son missed an important occasion. It was the suggestion that someone else had decided what was acceptable for their child without giving them the chance to object. And then came the detail that made the entire situation harder to dismiss. Catherine allegedly discovered a confidential palace memo that appeared to connect the decision directly to concerns about Louis's behavior and the image of the monarchy. If that account is accurate, the question suddenly becomes much bigger than one ceremony. It becomes a question of trust, authority, and what can happen inside a royal household when a decision is made quietly and parents are left outside the room. Before going deeper, hi viewers, would you be upset if someone secretly made a decision about your child without telling you? If that would hurt you, leave a simple yes in the comments, because this story turns on exactly that feeling.
You put on sort of brave-faced stoicism through treatment. The treatment's done.
Yes.
So I can crack on and get back to normal again.
The alleged memo is where the atmosphere changes. What had looked from the outside like an ordinary absence begins to look like something carefully managed. The claim suggests that staff were not merely carrying out a scheduling change. They were allegedly following an instruction that had already been decided, while William and Catherine were left unaware of the reasoning behind it. The alleged discovery leaves a question hanging over the household. Why would anyone believe that Louis's parents could be bypassed without consequences? A private royal ceremony can appear small, but inside the institution, invitations, attendance, security, seating, and family representation are rarely accidental. If a child is removed from that arrangement, the decision has to pass through people. Someone has to know, someone has to communicate it. Someone has to make sure the order is followed. That chain is what makes the allegation so unsettling. It suggests that the decision did not disappear into thin air. It moved from one set of hands to another. Staff allegedly received instructions. Louis was allegedly kept away. William and Catherine allegedly remained outside the process. Each step created another opportunity to ask a simple question. Why were his parents not being told? There is also an emotional question beneath the palace language. What does a child hear when adults decide that his personality is a problem? Louis may not understand titles, protocol, or the pressures surrounding the crown. But a child can understand exclusion. A child can notice when everyone else is being prepared for something and he is not. A child can sense when an explanation is being withheld. That possibility is what allegedly brought Catherine to the point of confronting what she had found. The memo was no longer paper. It represented a decision made about her son, and every line raised another question about who had been involved. William had a different concern. He needed to know whether this was an isolated decision or evidence of something larger inside the palace. If an instruction concerning Louis could allegedly be issued without his knowledge, what else could be decided without either parent being consulted? And that question is precisely why the next discovery matters. The alleged memo did not simply point toward Louis's exclusion. It reportedly opened a path toward the person behind the decision, and that path led directly toward Camilla. That distinction matters. Royal families live under constant scrutiny, but a private ceremony is supposed to offer a different kind of space. It is controlled. Attendance is deliberate. Every person present has a reason for being there, and every person absent can become noticeable. For Louis, whose public image has often been shaped by his youthful energy and spontaneous personality, being excluded for allegedly being too playful would carry a painful message. The allegation becomes even more striking because Louis was not being accused of some serious wrongdoing. The claim centers on the very quality that has made him so recognizable to the public, his childhood exuberance. He has been seen as lively, expressive, curious, and difficult to keep completely still. In ordinary family life, those traits belong to a child. Inside the machinery of monarchy, however, the story suggests they may have been viewed through a much colder lens. That is where Catherine's alleged discovery becomes so important. A mother learning that her child was discussed in private is one thing. A mother allegedly learning that a decision had already been made and that the decision was connected to the reputation of the crown is something else entirely. And William's position makes the alleged discovery even more explosive.
The monarchy will be shifting in a slightly different direction.
I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good. And I embrace that and I enjoy that change. I don't fear it. That's the bit that excites me, is the idea of being able to bring some change. Not overly radical change, but changes that I think need to happen.
As Louis's father and a senior member of the royal family, he would have expected to know when an important decision involving his son was being made. Instead, according to the story, he was confronted with the possibility that the decision had moved through palace channels without him. The room may have been quiet when the truth began to emerge, but the implications were anything but quiet. Catherine allegedly had the memo. William allegedly had questions. Camilla was suddenly at the center of them. And Charles, who initially appeared to stand behind his wife, would soon face a detail that could change his understanding of what had happened. That is the point where this stops looking like a disagreement over one invitation. Because if the allegations are accurate, someone inside the palace did not simply decide where Prince Louis should be. Someone allegedly decided that his parents did not need to know. And that is the part that makes this story so difficult to look away from. The next question is the one William could no longer ignore. Who actually gave the order? Why was Louis singled out? And why were his own parents allegedly kept in the dark? If you believe a child's parents should never be pushed aside when decisions are made about their own son, do not just watch silently. Like this video, share it, and subscribe, because the next part gets far more serious when the hidden instruction begins to come to light. The first sign that something was wrong did not come from William or Catherine. It came from the way the palace machinery suddenly moved around Prince Louis. A private ceremony had been arranged with the kind of careful planning expected inside the royal household. Names were considered. Attendance was managed. Staff knew where people were expected to be. Then Louis disappeared from the arrangement. The claim at the center of this story is that his absence was not accidental. It was allegedly ordered because his unpredictable, playful behavior was considered a possible embarrassment for the crown. That explanation raises a difficult question. Who decided that a child's personality had become a risk serious enough to remove him from the occasion? The answer, according to the allegations surrounding this story, points toward Camilla. But the important issue is not simply whether she disliked Louis's behavior or believed the ceremony required stricter control. The deeper issue is how the decision allegedly moved through the palace without William and Catherine being properly brought into it. Inside a royal household, decisions rarely happen with one person simply speaking and everyone else walking away. Staff have responsibilities. Private offices communicate instructions. Schedules are adjusted. Security teams are informed. Household personnel need to know what has changed. That means an order involving a young member of the family can leave a trail, even when the people behind it want the matter kept quiet. That trail is what Catherine allegedly began to notice. There were no dramatic announcements, no public confrontation, no official statement explaining why Louis would not be present. Instead, the situation reportedly appeared in fragments. A change here, an unexplained adjustment there, a quiet instruction passed through staff. None of those details alone would necessarily prove anything. Together, however, they created a pattern that demanded attention. Catherine was not looking for a scandal. She was looking for an explanation. That distinction matters because the palace has always depended on controlled communication. Public information is released when officials decide the timing is right. Private information is restricted because security, family matters, and institutional concerns can overlap. But according to the story's allegations, this situation crossed a different line. The parents of the child at the center of the decision were allegedly not given the full picture. The alleged reasoning also created a second problem. If Louis was being kept away because his behavior might embarrass the crown, then someone had made a judgment about how an 8-year-old child should behave in a controlled royal environment. That judgment may have been presented as practical. It may have been described as protection for the monarchy, but to William and Catherine, it could be understood very differently. It could look like their son was being treated as a liability, and that is where the pressure inside the household begins to build. William has spent years dealing with the demands of royal protocol, so he would understand why ceremonies require discipline. He would also understand that not every family member attends every private occasion. The issue, according to the allegations, was not that Louis missed something. The issue was who made the decision and who was allowed to know about it. That distinction would become critical. When Catherine allegedly began examining the circumstances more closely, she reportedly encountered information that did not fit the simple explanation. The decision appeared more deliberate than a routine scheduling choice. Someone had considered Louis's presence, considered the possible consequences, and allegedly decided that removing him was the safer option. But safer for whom? That question cuts straight into the heart of the dispute. If the purpose was genuinely to protect Louis, why would his parents be kept unaware? If the purpose was to protect the crown, why was a decision involving their child allegedly handled without their direct involvement? And if Camilla believed she had the authority to make that call, where did that authority supposedly come from? Those questions could have remained private if the paper trail had ended there. It did not. The alleged memo changed the situation because a written instruction carries a different weight from a whispered conversation. A rumor can be denied. A misunderstanding can be corrected. A written instruction can show what someone intended staff to do. According to the story, the document Catherine encountered contained language that connected Louis's exclusion with concerns about his behavior and the image of the monarchy. More importantly, the account claims it indicated that staff were expected to keep the decision from becoming an open discussion with William and Catherine.
For someone to help talk you through that, show you and guide you through that sort of phase that comes after treatment, I think is really valuable and really underrated, especially to have a space like this here.
That is the moment the story moves beyond hurt feelings. It becomes a question of internal control. Catherine's reaction, according to the allegations, was immediate because she could no longer treat the situation as a misunderstanding. The information suggested planning. It suggested that people inside the household had known about the decision, while Louis's parents had not. And there was another detail that made the matter even more sensitive. The alleged instruction was connected to the authority of the king. At first, that could sound like a routine palace matter. The king's household operates through officials, advisors, and established procedures. His name can appear in formal communications. His approval can carry enormous institutional weight. But there is a difference between acting with the king's authority and using his name without his approval. That difference is precisely where the next stage of the story becomes dangerous. William now had a reason to ask whether Charles had actually authorized the decision. If Charles had approved it, then the disagreement would be one thing. William and Catherine could challenge the judgment, but the instruction would at least have come through a recognized chain of authority. If Charles had not approved it, the situation would be completely different. Then the question would be why anyone had allowed staff to believe otherwise. This is why Catherine allegedly did not stop at the first discovery. She needed to know who had issued the instruction, who had received it, and whether the king's office had been properly consulted. Every answer carried the possibility of changing the entire story. The palace could survive a disagreement over one ceremony. It could survive different opinions about how Louis should behave. What it could not easily dismiss was an allegation that authority had been represented inaccurately inside the household. William understood that distinction. His concern was no longer limited to his son's absence. It was about whether the system around his family could be trusted. That realization set the stage for the confrontation that would follow. There was also a practical concern that made the alleged concealment harder to explain. Louis was not an outsider arriving unexpectedly at the ceremony. He was part of the immediate royal family, which meant decisions about his presence could affect the movements and expectations of several people around him. If staff were instructed to exclude him, they would have needed to know why they were doing it and what they were supposed to say if questions followed. That creates another uncomfortable possibility. The people carrying out the alleged instruction may have believed they were following legitimate authority. They may have assumed that the decision had already been cleared at a higher level. If so, the responsibility would not end with the staff members who followed directions. It would reach the person who gave the instruction and the person whose authority was allegedly placed behind it. That is why William's next move mattered. He could not simply accept an explanation offered after the fact. He needed to establish whether Charles knew, whether Camilla had acted independently, and whether anyone inside the palace had deliberately kept the truth from Louis' parents. The answers would determine whether this was a single judgment about a child's behavior or evidence of a much deeper breakdown in trust. And once William began asking those questions, the palace could no longer keep the issue contained. The next conversation would force Camilla to answer a question she could no longer avoid. Who gave her authority? Before that confrontation, however, one final piece had to be established. William needed to know whether Charles had actually given the approval that appeared to stand behind the decision. Because if the king had not approved it, the person who allegedly invoked his authority had a far bigger problem than explaining why Prince Louis was excluded. And if you believe parents deserve the truth when decisions are made about their children, do not scroll away now. Like, share, and subscribe, because the next part turns this private dispute into a direct confrontation with Camilla, and what comes out of it is far more serious than anyone expected. The paper was still in Catherine's hands when the question changed completely. It was no longer about whether Prince Louis should have attended the private ceremony. It was about whether someone had used the king's authority to make sure he did not. According to the allegations surrounding this story, that possibility was hidden inside the same palace system that had kept William and Catherine outside the decision. And now Catherine had something concrete to examine. She reportedly went through the memo again, slowly this time. The wording mattered. The instruction did not read like a casual suggestion. It appeared to give staff a clear direction concerning Louis's attendance. More importantly, the account claims that the language connected the decision to the crown and presented it with an authority that made staff believe it had already been approved at the highest level. That was the detail that stopped Catherine. If the king's name had been used, Charles needed to know. If Charles already knew, then William and Catherine needed to understand why their son had been handled this way. But if Charles had not approved the decision, someone had crossed a line inside the palace. Catherine's next move was not to make the matter public. She reportedly took the information to William. William did not need another explanation about Louis being playful. He needed the chain of command. Who had requested the exclusion? Who had approved it? Who had told staff to keep quiet? And why had the parents been left out? Those questions gave the memo its real weight. A document can reveal what people intended, but it can also expose what they assumed they were allowed to do. That distinction became critical because the alleged instruction was not simply about a child's attendance. It appeared to rely on institutional authority. William reportedly focused on that point. The story's allegations suggest that he wanted confirmation from the king's side before confronting anyone. He could not afford to accuse Camilla of acting without authority if Charles had personally approved the decision. That would turn a serious family dispute into something based on a misunderstanding. So the issue had to be checked. The palace staff who were allegedly involved could not simply answer with another vague explanation. Someone had to establish whether Charles had been consulted. Someone had to establish whether the king's name had been used with permission. And someone had to explain why William and Catherine had not been informed. That verification created a tense pause inside the story, because there were now two possible explanations. The first was that Charles had approved the decision and William and Catherine had been deliberately kept away from the process. The second was more explosive. Charles had not approved it at all. If the second possibility proved true, then the memo would no longer represent a disagreement between members of the royal family. It would point toward an alleged misuse of the king's authority. The verification process changed the mood around the household. Until then, there had been room for uncertainty. Perhaps the memo had been misunderstood. Perhaps the wording had been copied from an earlier instruction. Perhaps someone assumed approval existed when it did not. Those possibilities mattered because they could separate a breach from an administrative mistake. But the more closely the alleged instruction was examined, the harder it became to explain away. The central issue was the use of authority. Palace staff are expected to know which instructions they are following. A royal household cannot function if every employee treats an informal comment as an official command. There has to be a recognized chain, especially when children, security arrangements, and private ceremonies are involved. That is why the alleged reference to Charles carried so much weight. If his name appeared to support the decision, staff would have had little reason to challenge it. They could reasonably believe that the matter had already been settled. They would simply carry out the instruction and move on. But if Charles had never approved it, then the people following the order may have been operating under a false impression. That possibility placed William in a difficult position. He could not simply demand that everyone involved be punished. First, he needed to understand exactly what had happened. He needed to separate assumptions from instructions, instructions from approvals, and approvals from the person who made the decision. Catherine reportedly wanted the same clarity. She was not interested in turning the incident into a spectacle. Her concern remained Louis. The allegation had already suggested that his personality had been judged against the image of the monarchy. Now there was another question. Who had decided that image mattered more than allowing his parents to make the choice themselves? The answer would determine how William approached Camilla. If she had misunderstood her authority, the conversation could still be resolved privately. If she had knowingly acted without approval, the consequences could reach far beyond one family event. That was the line William was preparing to test. The allegations say the answer from Charles's side was not what William expected. Charles had not given the approval that the instruction appeared to suggest. That single point changed the balance. William now had reason to believe that Camilla's decision had not been authorized by the king in the way staff were allegedly led to believe. The situation had moved from a family disagreement into a question of authority inside the monarchy. Catherine, meanwhile, was left facing the emotional consequence. The memo had allegedly confirmed that Louis was excluded. The reasoning had allegedly connected his behavior to the image of the crown, and the secrecy had allegedly prevented his parents from challenging the decision before it happened. Now the king's own position appeared to contradict the authority behind the instruction. The next step could no longer be delayed. William had to confront Camilla, not as a son speaking casually to a stepmother, not as one royal family member complaining about another. He had to demand an explanation for a decision involving his child and for the authority allegedly used to justify it. That confrontation would expose whether this had been a misguided attempt to protect the monarchy or something far more serious. And this is where viewers have a choice. If a royal parent can allegedly be kept in the dark while a decision is made about their child, silence only allows that kind of power to remain hidden. If this story matters to you, like this video, share it with someone who follows the royal family, and subscribe now, because the next part brings William face to face with Camilla, and the questions become impossible to avoid. William did not raise his voice when he entered the conversation with Camilla. That was what made the moment so tense. The question had already been reduced to its simplest form. Did she authorize the decision that kept Prince Louis away from the private ceremony? And if she did, why had William and Catherine been excluded from the process? According to the allegations surrounding this story, William wanted an answer before the matter went any further. Camilla reportedly faced him with the argument that the decision had been made to protect the crown. The concern, as the story claims, was Louis's unpredictable behavior. His tendency to joke, move around, or react spontaneously could create an awkward moment during a tightly controlled royal occasion. That explanation might have sounded practical to someone focused entirely on protocol. But William was not discussing protocol in the abstract. He was discussing his son. There was a difference between preparing a child for a formal event and deciding that the child should not attend at all. There was another difference between advising parents about possible concerns and allegedly making the decision without them. William reportedly pressed that distinction. If staff believed Lewis needed extra guidance, why had no one spoken to his parents? If the ceremony required a certain level of discipline, why had William and Catherine not been allowed to decide whether Louis could meet that expectation? And if Camilla believed the situation was serious enough to remove him, why was the instruction allegedly handled through private channels instead of being discussed openly? The answers mattered because the original justification was beginning to look less convincing. Camilla's alleged position was that the crown could not afford an embarrassing scene at a sensitive royal gathering. She was said to have believed that preventing the possibility was better than dealing with it afterward. From that perspective, excluding Louis could be presented as a precaution rather than a punishment. But William reportedly saw a different problem. A child cannot be expected to learn royal expectations if adults decide that the safest solution is simply to remove him from the room. And Louis's parents could not help him understand those expectations if they did not know a decision had been made in the first place. That was where the conversation became personal. William reportedly made it clear that Louis was not a problem to be managed for the convenience of other people. He was a child. If there were concerns about his behavior, his parents should have been given the opportunity to handle them. Catherine's position was reportedly even more direct. The issue was not whether Louis should always be allowed into every ceremony. Parents understand that some occasions have restrictions. The issue was the secrecy. The allegations suggest that she wanted to know why staff had been instructed to keep the decision away from her and William. That question put pressure on the explanation Camilla had offered. If the decision had genuinely been made for the good of the crown, there should have been no reason to hide it from Louis's parents. If the decision had been routine, there should have been no need for unusual secrecy. And if the king's authority had been involved, then Charles should have been able to confirm it. But according to the claims, Charles could not. That changed the confrontation. William reportedly asked whether Charles had personally approved the instruction. The answer, according to the story's allegations, was no. For a moment, the issue was no longer about Louis's behavior at all. It was about authority. The alleged instruction had apparently carried enough weight for staff to act on it. Yet the king was now said not to have authorized the decision. That meant someone had either misunderstood the chain of command or had allowed staff to believe that an authority existed when it did not. William reportedly wanted to know which explanation was true. Camilla was now facing a much more difficult question than why she thought Louis should stay away. She had to account for the authority behind the decision. This is the point where the allegations become especially serious. The story claims that Camilla had used the king's name to give the instruction additional weight, even though Charles had not approved it. That allegation, if true, would change the meaning of everything that had happened before. A disagreement about a child's attendance could be resolved as a family matter. A disagreement about royal protocol could be discussed between households, but using the king's authority without his approval would raise a different institutional concern. William reportedly understood that immediately. His focus shifted from the ceremony to the process. Who had written the instruction? Who had passed it to staff? Who had been told that the king supported it? Who had decided that William and Catherine should not be informed? Every question narrowed the space for an easy explanation. The atmosphere inside the conversation reportedly became colder because the usual palace language was no longer enough. Words such as protocol, discretion, and protecting the crown could not answer the central issue. Why was William not told? Why was Catherine not told? And why was Charles's authority apparently attached to a decision he had not approved? Those questions also created a problem for the staff members who had followed the alleged instruction. If they believed they were acting under royal authority, they might not have had any reason to challenge it. Their actions could have been based entirely on what they were told. That meant the responsibility, if the allegations were accurate, would sit higher up. William reportedly demanded an internal investigation. The purpose was not simply to determine who had excluded Louis. It was to establish how the decision had been made, who had authorized it, and whether anyone had deliberately concealed the truth from the Prince and Princess of Wales. That demand raised the stakes again. An internal investigation could expose communications that had never been intended for William or Catherine to see. It could reveal who spoke to whom, which office issued instructions, and whether the king's name had been used as a shield. Camilla's defenders could still argue that the intention had been protective. They could say the goal was to avoid embarrassment and maintain control during a sensitive ceremony. They could insist that the decision was about the crown, not hostility toward Louis. But intention would no longer settle the matter. Authority would. There was also a personal consequence that could not be ignored. William was not confronting Camilla over an abstract rule. He was confronting a decision that had affected a child who could not defend himself inside a room filled with adults, titles, procedures, and competing loyalties. That mattered to Catherine because the alleged decision had reduced Louis to a calculation about appearances. The story did not claim that Louis had committed some serious act. It centered on the possibility that his natural behavior might create embarrassment. For his parents, that distinction was crucial. A child who needs guidance is not the same as a child who should be quietly removed. William reportedly made that point during the confrontation. He was not asking the palace to lower every standard for Louis. He was demanding that the standards be applied honestly, with his parents involved in decisions concerning their son. The alleged concealment made that harder to defend. If Camilla had simply spoken to William beforehand, the disagreement might have ended there. He could have rejected her recommendation. Catherine could have objected. They could have prepared Louis differently. There would have been an argument, but there would also have been transparency. Instead, according to the allegations, the choice had already been made before either parent knew. That was why the internal investigation mattered. It could establish whether the secrecy came from one person, several people, or a wider failure inside the household. It could also determine whether anyone knowingly used Charles's name to prevent questions from being asked. By this point, the ceremony itself had become irrelevant. The story right now was the chain of decisions behind it, and that chain was now leading directly to the king. For William and Catherine, the stakes were no longer limited to an explanation about Louis. They were waiting to learn whether the person they believed had authority over the decision had actually given it. If Charles had not, then the palace would have to confront a much harder truth. The allegations suggested that his name had been placed behind an instruction he never approved. And once officials reportedly confirmed that possibility, the balance of power inside the family was about to shift. The next conversation would not be between William and Camilla. It would be between Charles and the evidence. If you believe that no royal title should place anyone above accountability when a child is involved, do not look away now. Like, share, and subscribe, because the next part reveals what happened when Charles finally saw what officials had uncovered, and the situation got much worse. Charles had already defended Camilla. Then the evidence reached his desk. According to the allegations at the center of this story, the king was presented with information that forced him to reconsider what he thought had happened to Prince Louis. The issue was no longer a disagreement over a private ceremony. Officials had reportedly uncovered a much more serious problem. The decision to exclude Louis appeared to have been connected to the king's name, even though Charles had not approved it. The allegation placed Charles in an uncomfortable position. If he accepted the evidence, he could no longer simply defend Camilla's judgment. He would have to acknowledge that William and Catherine had a legitimate reason to demand answers. Their son had allegedly been excluded without their knowledge. Staff had allegedly been told to keep the matter quiet, and the king's name had allegedly been used to give the instruction greater force. For Charles, that was not a minor family disagreement. The monarchy depends on authority being clear. Staff need to know whose instructions they are following. Private offices need to understand what has been approved. Members of the family need to know when a decision affects their responsibilities or their children. If those lines become blurred, confusion can spread quickly. That is why the alleged discovery mattered beyond Louis. Charles reportedly asked officials to establish exactly what had happened. The investigation was not simply about finding someone to blame. It was about reconstructing the decision from the beginning. Who initiated it? Who communicated it? Who received it? Who believed the king had approved it? And why had William and Catherine allegedly been excluded from the conversation? Each question pointed back to the same uncomfortable issue. Someone had made a decision concerning Louis, and the people closest to him were allegedly the last to know. The emotional weight of that discovery was difficult for William and Catherine to ignore. The original incident had already been painful because Louis was their child. But learning that the decision may have been presented to staff as carrying royal authority created another layer of betrayal. Catherine reportedly felt the deepest impact because the alleged reasoning had focused on Louis himself. His personality had been treated as something that could damage the crown's image. That was difficult for any parent to accept. William, meanwhile, had to consider what the incident meant for the future. If a decision like this could happen once, could it happen again? That question mattered because Louis was not going to remain 8 years old forever. He would grow up inside the institution. He would attend more public occasions. He would make mistakes. He would sometimes behave like a child. He would also face expectations that few children could fully understand. The way adults handled him now could shape how he understood his place within the family later. If he learned that his natural personality made senior figures uncomfortable, he could begin to believe that he had to suppress himself to be accepted. If he learned that decisions about him could be made without his parents, he could also learn that palace protocol mattered more than trust. That was not a lesson William and Catherine wanted him to carry, and that is why the alleged confrontation had consequences beyond the ceremony. The story had begun with a question about attendance. It had moved to secrecy. It then moved to authority. Now it had reached the relationship between a father and his son, and between a royal couple and the institutions surrounding them. Charles reportedly understood that distinction. The allegations suggest that his initial defense of Camilla began to weaken once officials presented the findings. If the king's approval had not been given, then the explanation that the decision was simply part of protecting the crown could no longer settle the matter. The question became whether the crown itself had been used to justify the decision. That is a far more serious accusation. Camilla, according to the story, may have believed she was acting in the interests of the monarchy. She may have believed that preventing a possible disruption was responsible. She may have thought that her position gave her enough authority to act quickly. But intention does not automatically create authority. That was the issue Charles reportedly had to confront. William and Catherine were not asking for special treatment for Louis. They were demanding transparency. They wanted to know why their child had been removed from an occasion without their knowledge, and why the explanation had allegedly been kept away from them. That distinction became central to the family's response. At that point, Charles could no longer remain only a father watching a family disagreement unfold. He was the king. His authority had allegedly been attached to a decision he did not make, and William was his son. The conflict therefore carried two levels at once. One was deeply personal. A child had been excluded, and his parents were allegedly kept unaware. The other was institutional. The king's authority had allegedly been represented in a way he had not authorized. That combination explains why the story reportedly hit William and Catherine so hard. Their tears, at the center of the title, were not simply about missing one ceremony. They represented the emotional weight of discovering that a decision concerning Louis had allegedly been made without them. For Catherine, the hurt came from seeing her son discussed as a potential embarrassment. For William, the anger came from discovering that his role as a father had allegedly been bypassed. But the story does not end with anger. It ends with a question about what happens next. Charles now had to decide how far the palace should go in addressing what had happened. Would the matter remain private? Would Camilla be required to explain herself? Would staff face consequences for following the alleged instruction? And most importantly, would William and Catherine be assured that a similar decision could not be made about Louis again without their knowledge? Those questions matter because the damage was not limited to one day. Trust inside a family can be difficult to rebuild once people begin wondering what was said behind closed doors. William and Catherine may disagree with decisions made by other members of the royal household. That is normal. But disagreement is different from secrecy. A disagreement can be discussed. A hidden decision creates suspicion. And the allegations surrounding Louis's exclusion created exactly that suspicion. Louis was allegedly removed because adults feared what his behavior might look like. His parents were allegedly kept unaware, because someone believed the decision could be handled quietly. The king's name was allegedly used even though Charles had not approved the instruction. And when those pieces came together, the palace faced a problem that could not be solved by simply pretending the ceremony had never happened. William and Catherine wanted something much simpler. They wanted to know that decisions concerning their children would be made openly, honestly, and with their involvement. For Louis, that could be the most important outcome of the entire dispute. He does not need to become the perfect royal child. He does not need to erase every playful reaction or every spontaneous moment. He needs adults around him who understand the difference between guiding a child and treating that child as a threat to the image of an institution. That is why the allegations have generated such a strong reaction. The real question is not whether Louis should always be present. It is whether anyone should have the power to decide that he should disappear from a royal occasion without his parents being told why. And it is whether the king's name can ever be used to make such a decision when the king himself has not approved it. Those are the questions that remain. The alleged incident may have started behind a closed palace door, but the implications reach far beyond that room. It touches trust, family authority, royal protocol, and the treatment of a child growing up under extraordinary public pressure. William and Catherine were reportedly left facing a painful realization. Protecting Louis does not simply mean protecting him from cameras. It also means making sure the adults around him cannot quietly decide his place without his parents knowing. Charles, meanwhile, was reportedly left with a responsibility of his own. If the allegations are accurate, he had to make clear that his authority could not be borrowed, assumed, or used as cover for a decision he had never approved. And Camilla was left at the center of the controversy, facing questions that could not be answered by simply saying that the crown needed protection. Because the crown is not protected by secrecy alone, it is protected by trust. And once that trust is questioned, every quiet instruction becomes more important. Every private memo matters. Every unexplained absence raises another question. And every decision made behind closed doors can eventually reach the people it was supposed to bypass. That is what makes the alleged Louis incident so much bigger than one private ceremony. For William and Catherine, the answer appears clear. Louis is their son before he is a royal. And if the allegations surrounding this story are accurate, that principle was challenged in a way neither parent was prepared to accept. So before leaving this story behind, remember where it began. A child was allegedly excluded, his parents were allegedly kept unaware, and the king's name was allegedly attached to a decision he did not approve. That is why the tears mattered. That is why the confrontation mattered. And that is why the questions surrounding Camilla are not going away simply because the ceremony ended. If you believe William and Catherine were right to demand answers, do not let this story disappear into the same silence that allegedly surrounded Louis in the first place. Like this video, share it, subscribe to this channel, and turn on notifications, because refusing to look away is the only way these questions keep getting asked. And the next video coming to this channel goes even deeper into what happened inside the palace when the family finally had to face the consequences.